the House of Commons Standing Committee on Fisheries and Oceans. Pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and the motion adopted by the committee on Monday, October 19, 2020, the committee is resuming its study of the implementation of Mi'kmaq Treaty fishing rights to support a moderate livelihood. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to the House Order of September 23, 2020. The proceedings will be made available via the House of Commons website, so you are aware the webcast will always show the person speaking rather than the entirety of the committee. To ensure an orderly meeting, I would like to outline a few rules to follow. Members and witnesses may speak in the official language of their choice. Interpretation services are available for this meeting. You have the choice at the bottom of your screen of either Floor, English, or French. For members participating in person, proceed as you usually would when the whole committee is meeting in person in the committee room. Keep in mind the directives from the Board of Internal Economy regarding masking and health protocols. Before speaking, please wait until I recognize you by name. If you are on the video conference, please click on the microphone icon to unmute yourself. Those in the room, your microphone will be controlled as normal by the proceedings and verification officer. As a reminder that all comments by members and witnesses should be addressed through the chair. When you are not speaking, your mic should be on mute. Can't say that often enough. With regard to a speaking list, the committee clerk and I will do the best we can to maintain consolidated order of speaking for all members, whether they are participating virtually or in person. I would now like to welcome, of course, our witnesses today. We have the Honourable Bernadette Jordan, Minister of Fisheries and Oceans and the Canadian Coast Guard. As we hear also from the Department with her also from the Department of Fisheries and Oceans, we have Timothy Sargent, Deputy Minister, Sylvain Lapointe, Assistant Deputy Minister of Fisheries and Harbour Management, Doug Wenzel, Associate Regional Director General, Maritimes Region, and Robert Lamarand, Senior Advisor. We will now proceed with opening remarks. Minister Jordan, for 7 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I hope everyone can hear me okay. It is great to be here back at Fisheries and Oceans Committee. So to you and the committee members, thank you for inviting me. As you said, I'm here today because I want to be part of this very important discussion we're having. I am accompanied today by, as you mentioned, my Deputy Minister, Timothy Sargent, Doug Wenzel, the Associate Regional Director General for the Maritime Region, Robert Lamarand, the Senior Advisor on Indigenous, my computer's acting up. The Senior Advisor for Indigenous Relations, and Sylvie Lapointe, Assistant Deputy Minister, Fisheries and Harbour Management. I understand that the study currently underway was put forward by the MP Batiste, and I appreciate the testimony that the committee has heard so far from First Nations leadership, industry representatives, and academics. All of their voices are important in this discussion, and this is a conversation that Canadians need to hear. Since being appointed to Fisheries, Oceans and the Canadian Coast Guard portfolio in December of 2019, I have continued to build on the progress of my predecessors, Minister Jonathan Wilkinson and Minister LeBlanc. And I've been working with First Nations to further implement their treaty right to fish in pursuit of a moderate livelihood. When Canadians elected a Liberal government in 2015, after 10 years of Harper Conservatives putting reconciliation on the back burner, our government took action and expanded the mandate for moderate livelihood negotiations. These changes led to 2 rights and reconciliation agreements being signed in 2019 that further implemented the treaty rights to fish as affirmed by the Marshall Decision. And while discussions on advancing this treaty right have been taking place regularly, recent events in Nova Scotia highlight the complex issues around the implementation of the Mi'kmaq, Maliseet, and Passamaquoddy nations at Schoodic historic treaty right. They're a stark reminder that we must continue to do more and to work together. Our government remains focused and committed to the work we do with First Nations to implement their constitutionally protected, Supreme Court affirmed right, while ensuring that fisheries remain safe, productive, and sustainable for all harvesters. But there are no quick or easy solutions. This takes time and patience, and there will be challenges along the way. However, that cannot deter us from moving forward. We're also continuing our efforts to de-escalate the tensions on the ground by engaging all parties in constructive dialogue. On that front, I have met and will continue to meet regularly with both Indigenous leadership and commercial harvesters. During these discussions, we've heard from both parties the frustrations. First Nations are frustrated that negotiations have taken too long and that there's a lack of real progress to implement their right. Non-Indigenous harvesters are concerned about the future of the fishery and what it means for their livelihoods. That is why, along with Minister Bennett, our government recently appointed a federal special representative, Alistair Surratt. He's a neutral third party who is working to foster dialogue and rebuild trust between Indigenous and commercial harvesters. This is a structured forum for Mr. Surratt to gather different perspectives and address real questions and concerns with the goal of building a greater understanding. He will provide recommendations to the government on ways to move forward. Commercial fishers and First Nations have fished side by side for generations, and communities need to come together again. We need to ensure that treaty rights are implemented and the fishery remains productive for all harvesters. As the representative undertakes his work, nation-to-nation discussions with First Nations on the path forward will continue. While I cannot speak to the detail of these discussions, I can say that I believe there has been progress, and I'm having a productive conversations with many First Nations regarding proposed fishing plans in the short and the longer term. I also want to touch on the issue of conservation, as I understand it has been raised here a few times at this committee. I would like to say very clearly that conservation underpins everything we do. Lobster stocks are healthy, and we will never move forward with a plan that threatens the health of this species or any other species. I know that this approach is shared with many of the First Nations leaders I speak with regularly. It's also shared very strongly by harvesters in the commercial industry who have, over generations, worked in partnership with DFO to develop conservation practices and regulations that have helped build the stock to a healthy levels we have today. That progress is something that we will not jeopardize. I will continue to make every effort with industry to increase transparency, formalize the lines of communication, and ensure that industry has meaningful opportunities to share their concerns and express their views. Myself, my department, and this government remain committed to working with First Nations leaders to implement their treaty rights, and I will now be pleased to take any of your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. We'll get right into the questions now, and I will remind members that I'll try and be as strict as I can on the time so everybody gets their equal time to ask questions to the Minister. Mr. Bragdon, I believe you're leading off for the Conservative Party for 6 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Minister, for being here with us this evening. Minister Premier Stephen McNeil has been very critical of how you've handled this crisis so far. He's said that he is very dissatisfied, quite frankly, and, quote, "We need the federal minister to sit down with all sides in a room. It isn't enough to sit down with Indigenous leaders or with fishing associations by themselves." Do you agree with what Premier McNeil's position is, that you have not done enough to this point?
Actually, Mr. Bragdon, I have been extremely engaged on this file since I was first appointed minister. With regards to Mr. Premier McNeil's comments, we believe this is a nation-to-nation negotiation. That is what we will continue to do, to work with First Nations to make sure that we implement their treaty right. However, I do recognize that commercial harvesters have concerns, and that is why I have continued to meet with them as well. One of the reasons we appointed the special representatives was because we have heard that commercial harvesters feel that they wanted to have a stronger way to communicate with DFO. This third-party person will be able to help us move forward. But with regards to the Premier's comments, no, I believe we are doing everything we possibly can to make sure that we implement this treaty right.
Thank you, Minister. Here's a quote from Mr. Alan Clark. He's a retired DFO officer. He said, "I don't blame Indigenous fishermen or the non-Indigenous fishermen. I blame Minister Jordan or whoever she is getting advice from." He said, "My view is that they have mishandled the situation terribly and when they should have been following their own recommendations. Do you not understand that the tension that exists right now between the Indigenous and non-Indigenous fishers is a direct result of your government's mishandling of the situation?"
Actually, Mr. Bragdon, I would say that that's a false claim. This is an issue that the Supreme Court affirmed the right of Indigenous people to fish 21 years ago. There has been incremental progress, but there has been frustrations on both sides because we have not come to a place where we were able to implement, and that is successive governments, not this one. Actually, more progress has been made since 2017, since we've taken office, to make sure that we implement this right than has been for many years. We will continue to work with the First Nations to make sure that we do that. And with regards to the tensions, these are things that, there is no excuse, and there's no excuse for the tension and the vandalism and the violence that we've seen. And we're going to continue to work to make sure that we lower those tensions.
Thank you, Minister. Chief Darlene Bernard said, and she gave witness to our study and to our committee, she said, one of the things I'm getting very frustrated with is that we've sent letters. We sent a letter to the Minister of Fisheries and Oceans months ago in August saying, we want you to get back here and talk to us because there is a lot of unrest going on. We have never even got a response to that. So if we're not getting responses when we're actually asking to come and talk to us, so I think that has to be changed. Why didn't you meet with Indigenous communities when they were first calling on you to resolve this issue before it escalated into violence?
Actually, with regards to Chief Bernard, I had heard that testimony from committee. I have actually been following up to find out about that letter because I have not seen it. I have been meeting with the First Nations leadership since the start of this. I've met with all of the chiefs from KMK. I've met with the chiefs from Sabaganagati. I've met with chiefs from New Brunswick, as well as from Prince Edward Island. But with regards to Chief Bernard directly, I have been asking my department to follow up to find out where that letter is because I have not seen that request.
And Minister, a few weeks ago, we also heard from a witness that stated the violence is a symptom of a flawed negotiation process, followed by the government and the constant exclusion of the commercial fishers from fisheries management discussions. And I believe this was coming from Mr. Cloutier, and he said the government approach divides coastal communities that depend on fishing for a living. Clearly, there's a concern here that you are excluding commercial fishers, yet you've said previously that you met with them. Could you tell the committee which commercial fisheries associations you have met with?
Absolutely. I have met with the Brazil Rock Association, with Clearwater Cold Lobster Association. I've met with the Maritime Fisheries Union. I've met with the Independent Fish Harvesters Association. I have met with the Bay of Fundy Inshore Fishermen's Association. I have met with the Richmond County Fisheries Association. I have met with the Area 33 port authorities. I'm not sure if I have all of them in front of me, but I can get you a full list. I have met with all of those associations on more than one occasion, Mr. Bragdon. So I have met with the leadership from those organizations.
Thank you, Minister. But we've heard from whether it's First Nations chiefs, non-First Nation fishers, the Premier of Nova Scotia, retired DFO officers, even professors that have highlighted the root cause of all the strife in this situation in Nova Scotia right now is your handling of this crisis outside of your immediate circle. Is there anyone who will come out and say, this is being handled well and that we are where we need to be at this point in this crisis? This has escalated over a series of months. Can you point to any independent sources that are saying this is well in hand and it's going well?
Actually, there have been a number of times that I've spoken with chiefs who have actually gone public and said that they've been pleased with conversations. The commercial harvesters that I have met with, they cannot deny that I've met with them. We've had a lot of conversations over the last number of months. I have met with the leadership of KMKNO on a number of occasions, even before all of this escalated. Back as early as January, I was meeting with their leadership. I think it's important that we continue to have those conversations, and aside from me, my department officials have also been reaching out to those interested parties, to First Nations, to stakeholders, to make sure that their voices are heard.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Bragdon. We'll now move on to Mr. Batiste for 6 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Committee members, what we're talking about here is not weeks in the making or months in the making. This is 400 years of a relationship between two nations. For the most of the 200 years, it was about creating treaties to resolve crises, to live in harmony with one another. And for the past 200 years, unfortunately, it has been about treaty denial. And Minister, I just want to start off by thanking you for coming before us, but for all of your work. I know that we've had many conversations, and you've had many conversations with Mi'kmaq stakeholders and non-Mi'kmaq stakeholders. And at the heart of this matter is 200 years of injustice. And what we're trying to figure out is a way to navigate for the next 200 years, God willing. And I realize this is a heavy burden to place on any minister, any person. I also realize that DFO and the RCMP have a difficult burden and responsibility to act in accordance with evolving legal principles, such as the honor of the crown and reconciliation when dealing with Indigenous nations. With that in mind, Minister, this study is all about trying to make recommendations to move forward on that path together towards reconciliation. And I'm wondering if there's anything that you can talk to us about some of the complexities that you've found since taking on your role as minister.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Batiste, and I would also like to thank you for your advocacy on this and for helping to educate people on this issue, because it is a very big issue. As I've said many times, if this was a simple solution to this long-standing issue, it would have been solved 21 years ago, but it's not. It's very complex. Some of the challenges that we face are, the whole idea of defining what a moderate livelihood is. That is one of the biggest things that I feel that we're dealing with, because it's different for everybody. What a moderate livelihood is in one community is very different than what a moderate livelihood is in another community. So what we need to do as the Crown or as the government is make sure that we're listening to those communities. I think for too long, as you've said, the right has. We need to find a path forward for the next 200 years. And that path forward has got to include First Nations communities. We've built systems over years that did not include them, and we need to make sure that we do. So I think that as we go forward, it's going to be extremely important for us to listen to all of the communities involved, because every one of them has a different thought on what for a moderate livelihood looks like. I've been told many times or asked many times, why don't you just define the right and then it's done? I don't think that the First Nations communities want the Government of Canada to tell them what their moderate livelihood right is. This is something that has to come from the First Nations. This is something that has to come through the negotiations. This is something that has to come from ongoing conversations. That is what I am absolutely committed to doing, and I see the only way as through those conversations for us moving forward.
Thank you, Minister. Minister, many have come before this committee with great fears about the future of the industry. And many argue out there and speculate, as they did 20 years ago, that accommodating a Mi'kmaq moderate livelihood fishery would ruin the fishing industry in the Atlantic. Last week, a major development happened when a Mi'kmaq coalition led by Chief Terry Paul in Member 2 announced plans to buy Clearwater, the largest fishing company in Canada. The coalition borrowed millions and will be paying off this loan for the next 25 to 30 years. Minister, do you feel the Mi'kmaq coalition investment of $250 million into the fishing industry will ease some of the concerns about Mi'kmaq fishermen depleting the very resource that they've just invested so heavily in?
Well, and first of all, I'd like to say that our government welcomes the collaboration between industry and First Nations to grow the Canadian seafood industry. This project represents a positive step to building a strong partnership between Indigenous communities and the commercial seafood sector. It's a business venture, of course, that is voluntary. It's a commercial transaction between Premium Brands, Clearwater Seafoods, and the Coalition of Mi'kmaq Nations. And I'm going to continue to work with all partners to make sure that the seafood sector is sustainable for the long term. As I've said many times, the conservation has to underpin every decision that we make. I believe that First Nations as well as commercial harvesters believe that as well. And that is going to have to be the underlying theme of everything that we do, is making sure that we conserve the species for the long term.
Minister, in your conversation with Mi'kmaq leadership, has there been any solutions proposed that would both allow for them to practice a right, but at the same time being transparent, thereby easing the concern of many of the fishermen who depend on the fisheries for their current livelihood?
Well, I can't speak to negotiations specifically about what is being discussed at the negotiation table. I will say, of course, Mr. Batiste, that the presentation that you put forward with the Senator Francis and Senator Christmas is something that, of course, if the chiefs are interested in pursuing, it would be part of a negotiation process. But right now, I mean, I as I said, I can't speak to what's being said or done at the negotiation table.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Batiste. We'll now go to Madame Gill for 6 minutes or less, please.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Minister Jordan, for appearing before us today. I'd like to, first of all, wish you a good first year in your role. I've got a few questions for you. You know, we saw a lot of witnesses at this committee. We've got a lot of ideas. Not everyone agrees on all topics. I'm sure you're aware of that. I would have liked to have known. Well, you said that at the heart of the problem that's going on, there's the definition of a moderate livelihood. It can be defined for some, but not for others. And you said that you couldn't necessarily take a stance on that. And of course, that has to come from the First Nations themselves. They have to say what they would like. I'd like to know if there have already been attempts made or approaches taken by your department to discuss with First Nations who are affected by the Marshall decision so that there can be a move towards defining this term. 32 First Nations were affected. But which ones are they? Even if we can't know everything, well, in fact, what we want to know is what work has been done on this so far and how far have we gotten with First Nations?
Very much, Madame Gill, for the questions. First of all, I'd like to say that over the past 21 years since Marshall, there has been a lot of work done to implement the Marshall decisions, to work to make sure that First Nations have access to the fishery. There has been a number of investments made to make sure that there has been access through licenses, through boats, through training, through gear, so that First Nations communities do have an ability to fish. And I will say that in 1999, the landings value for First Nations fishery was about $3 million. Last year, that landings value was $120 million. So there has been progress made to making sure that First Nations have access to the fishery. With regards to the definition of a moderate livelihood, I think that the big thing here to remember is that we've built systems as governments throughout history that did not include the Mi'kmaq in their or First Nations in those systems. And we need to make sure that what we're doing now is allowing the First Nations to define the moderate livelihood for themselves. This can't be a top-down approach from government. This has to be something that comes directly from the Mi'kmaq. And although everyone seems to think it would be a much easier solution if the government just had a definition and then put everybody in place, I don't think that's the best way forward.
If I may, pardon me, I think my question wasn't properly understood. I'm not saying that the government should decide for the First Nations, definitely not. I'm saying rather, I want to know what you have done over the course of the last year. Earlier, you talked about Mr. Wilkinson and Mr. LeBlanc. What was done with the 32 First Nations to get to the point where they define the term? So, humbly, I think that the government should take action on this, and I'd like to know what was done in this respect.
I apologize for misunderstanding the question. Absolutely, there has been progress made actually in the last 3 years since we have a new mandate in 2017 to negotiate. There have been 3 agreements signed, 2 in New Brunswick, 1 in Quebec, with First Nations communities to get them to a moderate livelihood fishery. There is ongoing discussions with other bans with other communities to make sure that they have their right. We've been reviewing fishing plans that have been supplied to us from First Nations communities. We're working with those communities to implement the right, but we want to make sure that the fishery is productive as well as sustainable for everybody. So right now, the fishing plans that we've asked communities to give them to us. We have a number of them. We are reviewing them, and we will be working with the communities to make sure that those fishing plans are implemented.
Je vous remercie, Madame Jordan.
Thank you, Ms. Jordan. That still didn't answer my question. I'd really like to know what has been done to discuss with the 32 First Nations who are affected by the Marshall decision where the moderate livelihood definition is concerned. But no problem. I have another question that has to do with this. Well, if it can't be stated how many communities were part of the discussions, well, what would be the indicator used to measure the progress of these discussions with the First Nations? And I'm talking about First Nations, once again, who are affected by the Marshall decision.
Of course, I can't speak to what is actually happening in negotiations at this point. No. What I can tell you is that I have met with the 13 chiefs from KMKNO in Nova Scotia to make sure that we start the path forward with them. I have met with a number of the First Nations in New Brunswick to work with them to get their fishing plans so that we can review those plans to find the path forward. And of course, we have signed agreements already with the two bands in New Brunswick that will give them access to fisheries to make sure that they have what they need to exercise their moderate livelihood. And we've also actually had very good discussions with bands from PEI as well, and we're going to continue to do that.
Okay, thank you, Madam Gill. We'll now go to Mr. Johns for 6 minutes or less, please.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Minister, for being here today and for your testimony so far, and look forward to seeing you Tuesday night where we can ask you other questions that are unrelated to the study. Witnesses have stated that your current reconciliation agreements offered from your government have missed the mark because the mandate lacks any authority to make legal or regulatory changes in addressing the fundamental constitutional objective of addressing their Section 35 rights. Is the government willing to establish a mutually agreeable process to address these rights with First Nations that includes Crown Indigenous relations and other departments as required?
Thank you, Mr. Johns. And I will say that, with regards to negotiations, I have been in very close contact with Minister Bennett. She has been part of this since we've been going through it, recognizing how important it is to reconciliation is to our government. We want to make sure that as we go forward, we're doing everything we possibly can to meet our reconciliation objectives, to make sure that we're having these extremely important but sometimes extremely difficult conversations. I'm going to continue to do that. We are working with the First Nations to make sure that we can implement their moderate livelihood. That is the first priority. And then any ongoing discussions from there we will continue to have as we move forward.
Minister, we've heard from witnesses that a large part of the issue is that DFO actually doesn't have the mandate to negotiate on a nation-to-nation basis. That responsibility falls to the government and to Minister Bennett, and she should be leading this discussion. What actions have you taken to ensure that this is a true nation-to-nation discussion and not one based in existing regulations and colonial procedures?
This is absolutely a nation-to-nation discussion, and CERNAC is officials are with us at the table. We're making sure that they are very much a part of this. We take a whole of government approach to reconciliation.
Okay, Minister, but how involved is Minister Bennett in the ongoing discussions? There's a clear conflict of interest in your involvement when you're attempting to negotiate how to implement rights, while also being the main representative for the commercial fishery. This is really important that she's the lead.
Minister Bennett and I have been in very close collaboration on this file. She has been someone that has been very engaged on it since day one. We have had multiple meetings together with First Nations communities. CERNAC officials sit at the negotiating table with us. This is something that, we recognize how important it is to have them there. And that's one of the reasons we'll continue to make sure that CERNAC is part of this conversation.
Witnesses of these proceedings, as well as from the 5 Nuu-chah-nulth nations in my riding that are in court with your government, have stated that the government has failed to honor Supreme Court of Canada decisions that affirm First Nations treaty and protected inherent rights to fish or to a moderate living. The DFO interim policy response of the Aboriginal Fisheries Strategy, the FSC licensing system, and other access programs don't address the treaty protected inherent rights of First Nations. Is your government going to address the decades of outstanding business by demonstrating a willingness to prioritize this work with First Nations and ensure that these court decisions are honored and implemented effectively through nation-to-nation dialogue?
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. I would say that, this is absolutely a number one priority for us. I will say that, we have been working with First Nations to make sure that that they are able to implement that treaty right that is Supreme Court affirmed. These are ongoing discussions that we're having now with the First Nations communities. This is something that, no one's arguing that they have the right. We just have to make sure that we implement it. And that is what we are working towards. We are not shirking our responsibilities, as you seem to indicate. This has been something that has been top of mind for me, and I have been working on diligently since. You asked me a question. Could I finish answering it, please? Thank you. And I will say that, this is not something that's a simple solution. This is not an easy solution. If it was easy, it would have been solved years ago. And I am going to continue doing everything I can to make sure that First Nations rights are implemented.
You can stress urgency all day, though, and they emphasize how big of a priority it is. But the reality is it's been 21 years since the Marshall decision was made, and much longer since the treaties were first signed. And we go back to the Nuu-chah-nulth. That's 2009. The lived experience of First Nations is that it isn't a priority for this government, and there's not much optimism that things will be different in the near future. What is different about your government, and how can the Mi'kmaq trust that you're actually going to commit to prioritize this work and the Nuu-chah-nulth?
Actually, Mr. John, since 2017, since we had a negotiating mandate put forward, we've actually signed agreements with First Nations. We have signed three negotiation mandates within last year. We know that there is more to be done. We're continuing to work with the First Nations, but up until 2017, there was no negotiating mandate to do this work. So we have, since we've been elected, actually made this a priority. We will continue to do that. It's like you said, it's been 21 years. It's not easy, but it is definitely something that needs to be done. And I am absolutely committed to making sure it gets done.
Well, and with regards to the mandate, does your department support a self-governing Mi'kmaq treaty fishery governed in accordance with Mi'kmaq law?
These are all discussions that we are having with the Mi'kmaq right now. Minister Bennett is extremely engaged in this file. We are going to continue to have those discussions. We know that there's Section 35 rights involved. This is all things that we are talking about when we are meeting with First Nations communities.
Thank you, Mr. Johns.
Thank you.
That answers your question before you ask it. We'll now go to Mr. Morrissey for 5 minutes or less, please. No, Mr. D'Entremont. I'm sorry.
Morrissey, D'Entremont, it's close to the same. Anyway, Minister, it's good to see you. Congratulations on removing the cormorant today. I know that was probably a big day in your life, so congratulations on that. I want to go back to the core of why we're here talking about it, because this is ground zero for, I would call it, the lobster crisis. When was your department, when were you, Minister, made aware that there was an illegal commercial summer fishery going on in St. Mary's Bay?
I will say that there has been concerns around St. Mary's Bay for a number of years now. We have had discussions. I have had discussions with commercial harvesters over the past number of years with regards to the situation in St. Mary's Bay. Those discussions I had with them actually led to me meeting with First Nations communities prior to this summer to try and work out an agreement with them. And so I would say that, I mean, the escalation that happened was really something that, made everyone recognize that this is something that needs to be dealt with quickly.
OK, merci pour ça. Je vais répondre.
Thank you very much. I will ask my next question in French because we're in Claire. Robert Thibault, the former Liberal Minister of Fisheries and Oceans, who is now the spokesperson for the coalition, a coalition in Nova Scotia, said that there's an article from 15th of November, and he said this has been going on for 15 years, if not more. In the last 2 or 3 years, it has gotten to an industrial scale. It has become organized crime where people from the Acadian community get people from the First Nations community to come and fish outside of the fishing season and do commercial fishing. So what do you think of Mr. Thibault's comment?
Thank you, Mr. D'Entremont. And of course, I can't speculate on things that are literally speculation. I will say that, as I have said all along, First Nations have an affirmed Supreme Court right to fish, that we will continue to work with them to make sure that we implement their moderate livelihood fishery. With regards to any type of if there is illegal activity going on, that has to be reported to the RCMP, and then they have to be able to do their job.
Well, the fishing is under your responsibility. So why was there so little enforcement, or has there been enforcement or any kind of review of what was going on in St. Mary's Bay over the last number of years? Have you pulled traps? Have you been checking those traps? Are they conforming, non-conforming? What kind of work has been done in St. Mary's Bay up to now?
There have been a number of traps pulled over the past number of years, this year as well. There's also been charges laid, and I believe there was actually a court decision on a buyer who was buying illegal lobster. So there has been ongoing work done. Of course, I can't speak to ongoing investigations about what's happening, but there is absolutely always, CNP is always there to do their job. That is what that is their main goal, is to make sure that they do everything they can to protect the species and to keep people safe. I will say that, I have a great deal of respect for the CNP officers who are working very hard right now and in a very challenging time to make sure that they're doing everything they can to keep the tensions on the water low.
Okay, well, what I'm trying to really get to is there data that maybe you can provide the committee on maybe the last 5 years, how many traps have been pulled, how many of them have been conforming, and whether or not you ended up pulling or checking the traps that Sepenekity had put in the water during their moderate livelihoods. I'm just wondering, data plus what happened. I
can actually, my deputy is also on this call. I can ask him if there is anything that we can provide to the committee in writing at a further date.
Okay, well, let me bump off. We'll talk about that one later on. Let me bump off to something that's a little more disturbing. Minister Chief Sack has been threatening everyone who has an opposing view, including you. He's targeted you on a number of articles today. Not that we should all listen to Facebook, but in the most recent post, he wants to recruit warriors to disrupt the opening of District 34. So I'm just wondering what Department of Fisheries is going to be doing to make sure that everyone stays safe during the opening of the season next week.
Of course, that
very brief answer, please.
Okay, that's actually a very important question, and I have to say that the priority has to be people staying safe. I would have liked to have referred this one actually to my departmental officials, but I don't think I'm going to have time to do that. Is that correct, Ken? Okay. Oh, sorry.
Maybe I'll get back to it on my second round.
Okay.
Okay, not a problem. Thank you for that. Now I'll go to Mr. Morrissey for 5 minutes or less and apologise for trying to get him up earlier.
No, you caught me off guard, Chair. I wasn't ready, but thanks for getting me in now. My question is, Madam Minister, actually, it's a bit ironic, even hypocritical, to sit here and listen to some of the questions from the official Conservative opposition, criticizing you on your approach. You've been the minister for 1 year. Versus the period from 2006 to 2015, when the former Conservative government was basically absent on this file and kicked it down the road. As well as you may be able to refresh some members of the committee here of what the former government's approach was as it relates to enforcement with cutbacks in that area, which has led us to some of the issues we have today. But you can do that in your answer. I want you gave a good statistic where you said the value of the First Nations fishery today versus 2019, because we've been hearing from witnesses on this committee, and there appears to be a perception or a view held that there's been no access to this Marshall in 2019. I know you won't have it here, but could you provide to the committee, give a brief overview, and provide to the committee detailed listing of the access to various fishery stocks by First Nation community, so we can see exactly what progress has been made over those years?
Absolutely. I'm happy to get that information to the committee, Mr. Morrissey. I will say that ACFI and its predecessors, including the Marshall Response Initiative, there was a significant amount invested over the past 21 years in programs that have provided close to $530 million for licenses, for vessels, for gear, for training, in order to increase the First Nations participation in the commercial fishery. We want to make sure that they're able to pursue a moderate livelihood, and this is actually one of the ways that the governments have addressed this concern. But I will absolutely, I'm more than happy to get you more information in terms of which First Nations received.
Okay.
And where.
Thank you, Minister. I think it's important because there's been a perception that nothing has occurred. I want you to comment briefly, and you said earlier, how many agreements have been signed since our party formed a government versus a period before? Because I haven't been hearing much on this. Would you have information on that, Minister?
So when we came into government in 2015, there were no agreements signed. We received a new negotiating mandate in 2017. Since that time, we have signed agreements with Escanabich in New Brunswick, as well as Elsipogtog in New Brunswick, and I believe VJ in Quebec. I can get my department to confirm that. Those have all been signed in the past year. We also have had very good, very positive discussions with First Nations in other areas that I think are very close to signing agreements with, and I believe that we will see those in the very near future.
So, Madam Minister, so progress is being made on what everybody acknowledges is an extremely difficult file to manage. And certainly I know you've been taking a lot of pressure, but I want to compliment you on the approach that has been taken under your leadership. Could you comment briefly, in your opening comments, you made a comment, which is important for the commercial fishers to hear from you as Minister, that you will not allow the stocks to be jeopardized. Is one of your overriding management issues. So could you speak to that a bit more, Madam Minister, and the tools you have to ensure that?
Absolutely. This is conservation underpins everything we do at DFO. Making sure that the stocks, which are healthy right now, remain healthy for generations and sustainable for long-term fisheries is critical. And that's not only for commercial harvesters, but that's for First Nations as well. Everybody has the same goal here. Nobody wants to see the stocks depleted. Every decision that I make with regards to agreements, with regards to making sure that we're moving forward in a positive way, will always have conservation at the head of it. We'll always have conservation and making sure that, we have a long-term sustainable industry. We rely on it here in Atlantic Canada, as you know yourself, Mr. Morrissey, in your area. The lobster fishery has to be something that we continue to work to make sure is there for years and generations to come.
Chair, how's my time? Is it gone?
Yeah, just now. Yeah, you're up. Thanks, Mr. Morrissey, for that. We'll now go to Madam Gill for 2.5 minutes, please.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. as some witnesses said in the different consultations, well, the answers we receive are very fuzzy, and to define moderate livelihood is probably the First Nation to define it, and the accord that we signed with the Malicite from Vigée. I don't know what to think about it, and I'm sure First Nation as well. So I would like to hear the minister on the different initiatives. We know that there are positive initiatives, whether it's Marshall communities or the Malicite. Well, they don't want only commercial fisheries. Well, what you say is not necessarily what the First Nation would like to see, and we'd like to hear about the different programs as well.
J'ai seulement, Monsieur le Président.
Merci, Madame Gill. I will say that what you actually just said is completely how we've been working. Not everyone has the same agreements of what they want. Some want a fishery that isn't, commercial in scope. It's not the giant $1 million licenses and boats. It's a small fishery for themselves, for their communities. It's not the same. So that is one of the challenges we have, is that everyone is different. And some communities do want those large scale commercial fisheries. They do want the access and the ability to make sure that they can fish, in the bigger picture. Whereas some communities don't want that. So that's what we're doing right now, is working with those communities to find out what it is that they do want in their fishing plans.
I have very little time, but what I'm saying is not what they ask. What we heard is that they ask for a certain type of fisheries. They don't want necessarily commercial fishing. And how can we know that the programs and the treaties are good if we can't define moderate livelihood? And I don't know how we can evaluate it if we don't have indicators taken from the agreements.
Part of the biggest challenge of this is to determine what it is that the First Nations want in terms of their moderate livelihood. As I have said many times, that is different from community to community. And that is one of the reasons that, we are continuing to have these ongoing discussions. Some do want the larger commercial access. Others are looking for just a small scale niche fishery. That's one of the reasons we have to continue to have these long-term discussions.
Thank you, Madame Gill. Now we'll go to Mr. Johns for 2.5 minutes, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Minister. Minister, we just heard the Conservatives call this a Baganagadi treaty fishery an illegal fishery. Do you see it as an illegal fishery?
Mr. Johns, the First Nations have a court affirmed, Supreme Court affirmed right to fish a moderate livelihood. Right. That is, there is absolutely no question around that. The question, of course, is how we implement that right. That is what we are working towards now.
Great. Good. I'm really happy to hear you say that. They also identified that they made an accusation about Chief Sack bringing in warriors. My understanding that Chief Sack has actually called off warriors coming to the region in hopes that the RCMP would be there to protect them. And we didn't hear the Conservatives, on the ground calling off fishers that were threatening fishers. Can you speak about what you're going to do to ensure that those fishers are protected, Indigenous fishers there on the ground and on the water?
I will say there is absolutely no place for violence. There's absolutely no place for vandalism, although you understand the frustrations people feel. This is not the way to move us forward. The RCMP have been on the ground in St. Mary's Bay area, as well as in other areas that have seen some, concerns. We as a government, of course, the RCMP are regulated through the province of Nova Scotia, but we as the federal government has made sure that they have the resources they need in order to address these concerns. The RCMP have a job to do, and, they are there to do that job.
Minister, we've been told you've been meeting regularly with Mi'kmaq leadership in Nova Scotia, but we've heard from other First Nations leaders about a lack of communication from you and the need for political dialogue away from the table. Are you prepared to commit to regular meetings with First Nations leadership across the entire region to discuss fisheries issues?
Absolutely. I mean, I'm happy to meet with all of the First Nations to make sure that we do move this forward. I have actually in the past met with many of the First Nations in all of the provinces, actually right across the country, but particularly in Atlantic Canada. But it's extremely important that we get their fishing plans so that we know what it is that they would like to, exercise as their moderate livelihood, so that we can work with them to make sure that that right is implemented.
Minister, I think I'm running out of time, I believe. So thank you.
Yeah, you got about 3 seconds left, Mr. Jans.
Great.
If you'd had a bit more and got the question in, I would have allowed an answer. We will now go to Mr. Williamson for 5 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Minister Jordan, for being here today. In testimony before this committee, First Nation leaders that we've heard from, along with lawyers and academics, believe Indigenous communities can regulate and oversee an Indigenous fishery outside of DFO control. What do you think of that view that we're hearing repeatedly at committee?
I would say that that DFO has a responsibility to make sure that the fishery is sustainable for the long term. However, I would also say that I think it's important that we work with the First Nations communities to make sure, as they implement their right, that we have the same goals and objectives, that we work together to implement that right in a way that is going to make sure that they are able to have their moderate livelihood, but that we are convinced that this is not a conservation challenge. These are all things that we are having ongoing discussions about, and I would say that it's extremely important that we continue to work together to find the right path forward.
Thank you. In the Marshall decisions, the ruling is that government oversight is paramount, and that the authority to regulate both Indigenous along with traditional fisheries resides with the federal government. Do you agree with that court ruling?
I believe that the court ruling was very clear on the role that the Government of Canada plays in the fishery. I believe also, though, that it was very clear that the First Nations have a right that needs to be implemented. I think that finding that balance is what we need to work towards, is making sure that we have the ability to implement the right, but also make sure that we protect the fishery for the long term.
And do you support one fishing season? Now, I recognize all the different LFAs have different seasons, but within those LFAs, do you support one fishing season as the Government of Canada works towards the moderate livelihood? And I'll point out the Marshall decision upheld this. The 1999 Fisheries Committee also recommended this, and today MP Wayne Easter is also saying this should be the policy. Is that your policy?
Well, we are continuing to have negotiations with First Nations to make sure they can implement their treaty right. We will. I can't speak to what's going on at the negotiation table. I will say that I have heard very loudly and clearly from commercial harvesters around their concerns. Conservation will always be what underpins everything we do at DFO. That has to be the number one priority, and making sure that the stocks are healthy for the long term is that priority. So
you're open to establishing a second parallel fishing? No, I'm asking you a question. I'm going to ask you to clarify. So you're open to establishing a second parallel fishery in the LFAs in Atlantic Canada?
No, you are putting words in my mouth, Mr. Williamson. I ask you not to do that. What I said was it's extremely important that we implement the fishery, that we implement the First Nations right to a moderate livelihood fishery. That the Supreme Court was clear on how that it has to that the Government of Canada is the regulator that regulates that fishery. That will be part of the negotiations as we go forward.
Okay. So do you agree or disagree with your colleague MP Wayne Easter that there should be the Indigenous and non-Indigenous fisheries should all occur within the regulated seasons?
No, Mr. Easter has a right to his opinion as an MP. He has been very vocal on this issue. He's a former chair of the Fisheries Committee. I will say that I will not comment on what is being negotiated at this point. I will say that I have heard from commercial harvesters about their concerns around seasons. This is something that I understand completely, and I will put conservation first in all of the negotiations that I'm having.
But you're not closing the door to the proposal at the negotiation table of having two separate fisheries in different seasons.
I am not able to speak to what is being negotiated. I will say that I have heard very loud and clear from commercial harvesters what their concerns
Minister,
are.
that's not good enough. And I'm not asking you to speak to specific negotiations,
your time is
but
up,
you can
Mr.
you can put parameters around what is.
Mr. Williamson.
Thank you.
If you'd listen to the chair for just a moment, when I indicate your time is up, I mean your time is up. I'm trying to get everybody equal questioning. I don't want to be cutting people off way before their time is up for a ramble afterwards. So I'd appreciate that kind of attention, please. We'll now go to Mr. Callaway for 5 minutes or less.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and hello, colleagues, and hello, Minister. Good to see you all today, and to the Minister as well. Just a quick statement and then a couple of questions on conservation. This gives me an opportunity just to give a special shout out to the commercial fishers in Cape Breton and Canso, who have been demonstrating leadership during a complex, challenging, and nuanced time, and the same would be said to the three Mi'kmaq communities in my riding. So I want to go on the the stream of conservation. A few of us have talked about it today. Now, we've heard here at this committee that the lobster stocks could not support a moderate livelihood, and that commercial fishers' largest concern, and I've heard this too through many meetings that I've had, is having a fishery that lasts for generations. So could you tell us about the state of lobster stocks? But also, and the second question is this, Minister, your statement on Friday around this issue, I'm wondering if you could explain the status of the lobster in St. Peter's Bay in my riding and the context of that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Callaway. I will say that generally lobster stocks are very healthy. The monitoring recently indicated that the fishing activities that are taking place have increased significantly in St. Peter's Bay. The scale of the operation of the current fishery there is actually even in excess of what the First Nation moderate livelihood fishing proposals are. DFO is responsible for the overall management of Canada's fisheries and the stocks that they depend on. So we need to make sure that the fisheries officers I'm going to restart again. The fisheries officers are very concerned about the excessive fishing that's there, and that it could negatively impact the long-term sustainability. We are concerned about that. We want to make sure, as I have said every time I've talked about this issue, that conservation has to be the priority. And as I've said, right now, what's going on in St. Peter's Bay is more than what even the First Nations moderate livelihood plans have indicated that they would be fishing.
Thank you very much. I want to actually build on a question that MP Morrissey talked about in one of his questions, just around the government's track record on reconciliation on the East Coast. I wonder if you could do a deeper dive on that for us in terms of that, because I think it's important. It's an important narrative. It's an important reality around the track record to date on reconciliation as it relates to our corner of the world on the East Coast. So in 2015, when we formed government, there had not been any agreements with any of the First Nations in Atlantic Canada. In 2017, we as a government came out with a mandate to negotiate with First Nations with rights and reconciliation agreements with fisheries components. We have actually made significant progress since 2017 on those agreements. We know that there's a lot more to be done. We know that this is a challenge for First Nations and governments to come together to make sure that we implement those rights. As I said, we have signed 3 agreements now. We have others that are very close to being
signed. We know that there's communities that want to have ongoing agreements with the Government of Canada to exercise their moderate livelihood, and that's got to be the priority. I will say that we have been working diligently since 2017 when we first got the mandate to do this in order to make sure that we could address some of these First Nations communities and a long-standing issue of a right that has not been implemented.
Thank you very much. How much time do I have, Mr. Chair?
1 minute.
Okay, I have just another question. I think it'll probably take less than a minute, but maybe we'll have the right amount of time. I'm not sure. It's an important question, not just for those that are here today, but for Canadians that are watching. Can you, and 50 seconds or less, by the way, can you please try to explain just the challenges and the complexities of what is happening out of the Marshall decision? I know that we only have now 40 seconds, but if we can try to crystallize some of the challenges and complexities that you're facing, as well as those around the table.
Thank you very much, Mr. Callaway. And that is a very challenging and very complex issue. And, I've said it many, many times, if it was simple, it would have been solved over the last 21 years. There's been a number of times that, we've made incremental progress with the making sure that First Nations have access, but we've never actually worked to a point where we were able to implement the right. And the right looks different from community to community. It can't be something that the government just goes in and puts their foot down and says, this is what a moderate livelihood looks like. It has to be done with the communities. They have to be ready to have those conversations. They have to be willing to, talk to us about what they see as their way forward. The fishing plans that we have received so far, there's a lot of really good hard work that has gone into these that will show us the path forward. And, I'm looking forward to actually getting some understandings with these communities on these agreements.
Thank you, Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Callaway. That completes our first round of questioning. We'll now get into our second round. We'll now go to Mr. Moore for 5 minutes or less, please. Good night.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, and it's great to be here with all of you today on Fisheries Committee. I'm particularly pleased to be on committee today, as in my riding of Fundy Royal represent two fishing communities that fish out of different districts, both in St. Martin's as well as Alma. And my constituents are watching this issue very closely because they're concerned about the broader implication on the fisheries throughout the region. Minister, my question is, have you read the entirety of the Marshall decisions?
I have not read it in its entirety, no.
Well, do you know then, though, who is ultimately responsible? The Marshall decision, you realize, did not find that there could be no laws as it pertains to the Indigenous and the non-Indigenous fisheries. Ultimately, who's responsible in Atlantic Canada for the fishery and for policing what happens on our waters?
The Marshall decision actually said that the fishery is regulated under the Government of Canada, under the Marshall decision. I don't believe anyone thinks that there should be a lawless, I think is the word you used, fishery. I believe that First Nations have a right that was also affirmed in the Marshall decision, and we need to make sure that we implement that right.
I didn't say lawless. I said the laws as they pertain to our country. It is the responsibility of the Department of Fisheries and Oceans to enforce that. When I first came on to this committee today, I was hoping to hear some assurances that communities throughout our region would take from your testimony. And in fact, seem to get the impression that everything seems to be going just great in the perspective of yourself and other members. And I don't think that's the way people see it. So I hope you understand that the engagement that you've had on this file has communities across Atlantic Canada concerned about the broader impact throughout our region. So what would you say other communities like St. Martin's and Almar to take away from the handling of this issue in your own backyard?
Thank you, Mr. Moore. And I would say that because I come from a small rural coastal community myself, that as the Minister for Fisheries and Oceans, I will never do anything that's going to undermine the conservation of our industry, of making sure that, we have a long-term sustainable fishery. This is critical to us as Atlantic Canadians, but it's also critical to us as all Canadians to make sure that First Nations who have a treaty-affirmed right to fish for a moderate livelihood are able to implement that right. That is something that, the Supreme Court of Canada ruled on in 1999. And, I will always stand and say that conservation is the number one priority and objective. I've heard that from commercial harvesters, and I've also heard that from First Nations. So we all want the same thing. We just need to figure out how we get there. And I will say that, the conversations that I continue to have with commercial harvesters, with industry representatives, with First Nations, all of them have said that is what their overall objective is. So, I am not going to do anything at any point that's going to undermine that conservation objective. The commercial industry is extremely important to us in Atlantic Canada. We want to make sure that it is sustainable for the long term. Those are all things that I am working towards every day.
Thank you. And we all agree in conservation, but I would hope that we around the table also agree that community members throughout Atlantic Canada deserve to know what the rules are and that they'll be applied, and that there's been a complete vacuum on this issue, and our communities are calling out for leadership on it. Minister, you said the RCMP has a job to do, but I would say that you, Minister, and your department have a job to do, and that is to regulate the fisheries throughout Atlantic Canada. And what I haven't heard today, what I've heard so far, has not been encouraging. Mr. Morrissey mentioned that you've been minister for a year, but your government has been in government for the last 5 years, and this episode has been allowed to fester over the last little while. We've watched it unfold, and it's extremely important for the future, not just of conservation that I think we can all agree on, but also the sustainability of our communities and our fisheries. And I think the fishermen in my riding would like to hear a stronger statement from you, Minister, that their livelihood is going to be protected and their ability to earn a living is going to be protected as we move forward.
Okay, I'm sorry, Minister. We're gone about 40 seconds over the allotted time. We'll have to, if you can submit something in writing if it doesn't get done later in the testimony. We'll now go to Madame Petitpas-Taylor for 5 minutes or less, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And I have to say, you run a tight ship when it comes to the clock. So well done. Special welcome and thank you, Minister Jordan, for being with us today, and to your officials, Deputy Minister Sargent, Madame Lapointe, Mr. Wetzel, and Mr. Lamirande. We really appreciate you all being here to provide your insights and your thoughtful questions to a file that is really complex. Minister Jordan, I know that you've been working tirelessly over the past year, and we appreciate your openness and really all of your hard work, and what we know has been really challenging at times. Being from the Moncton area, I have to say I'm not in a fishing community per se, but this file has certainly captured the attention of many, many Canadians, and everyone is really watching this, and we really want to come to a resolution. So again, thank you for being with us today. I have two specific questions for you, and the first being, I'm wondering if you would be able to elaborate and to speak to the federal special representative that was recently appointed, Monsieur Surette. Could you elaborate on his role and his responsibilities?
Absolutely. Thank you for that question. Mr. Surette was appointed, it was a joint appointment with myself as well as Minister Bennett from Crown and Indigenous Relations. One of the things we heard a great deal from commercial harvesters was they wanted to be at the table. We, of course, are negotiating nation to nation with the First Nations communities, and we wanted to make sure, though, that they felt that their voice was heard. So the appointment of the special representative is there to actually foster dialogue between the First Nations communities and the commercial harvesters to make sure that everyone's voice is heard, to make sure that we are, absolutely engaged with the commercial harvesters. Mr. Surette is a well-respected member of his community. He has experience in working with the fisheries in the past in terms of, difficult situations in fisheries, particularly in New Brunswick and Prince Edward Island. And he brings a wealth of knowledge to this table. The other thing that he is going to be able to do is he will be coming back to Minister Bennett and myself with an interim report in December, as well as a final report in March with possible ways forward to help us bridge these gaps. Commercial harvesters and First Nations have fished together for generations. The divisions that have happened over this issue are difficult, and we need to make sure that we are doing everything we can to bridge those gaps and make sure that we can have our communities meld back together again.
Thank you so much. And I couldn't agree more. Mr. Surette is certainly an appropriate individual, to be doing these functions. So thank you for that. My last question that I have for you, how are we ensuring that the harvesters are part of the bigger conversation here? Because we certainly want to make sure that they have their voices heard as well. And could you share with us kind of how are we ensuring that they're at the table?
So as I've said, this is a nation-to-nation negotiation. So all of the negotiations are happening between the government of Canada and the First Nations communities. However, First Nations the commercial harvesters have an extremely important role to play. We want to make sure that we're hearing from them. I have been meeting with them on a regular basis. My department officials have met with them all on a regular basis as well. Having Mr. Surette there as well is going to be extremely beneficial, because having the third party that's independent, that they feel that they can probably say things to that maybe they wouldn't be comfortable saying to a DFO official or to myself, then I think is very beneficial. They are, they've been longtime stewards of the resource. We want to make sure that we're hearing from them, that our communities rely on our commercial industry, and we want to make sure that, as I've said many times, that this is sustainable and for the long term, making sure that we have everything that we need to have the right path forward for everybody.
Great. And I think I've got one more minute, perhaps, Mr. Chair. Maybe if I can, I'll ask
40 seconds.
40 seconds. Very quickly, I guess, what steps are we taking to make sure that everyone is safe, to really ensure the safety and security of everyone involved in this?
I think that is actually a really important question. We have been, doing everything we can to keep tensions down. We feel that having Mr. Surette there as someone who can speak to the commercial harvesters has kept tensions down on the water. My officials engage regularly with the members of the communities of both First Nations as well as the commercial industry. The RCMP are there on the ground for not only to, if anything happens, but just to make sure that that temperatures are lowered in the area. We've seen that has happened over the last number of weeks, and we hope that continues on.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. We'll now go on to Madam Gill for 2.5 minutes, please.
Merci, Monsieur.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I'll be the devil's advocate here. we said that Indigenous and non-Indigenous fishermen are asking questions. And earlier you said that, of course, we can't work without a regulatory framework. But now, with what's happening and out-of-season fishing, how can you explain that there is no regulation in place?
Regulations in place. The conservation and protection officers are there to do a job. They are monitoring situations. They have removed traps in areas where they feel that overfishing has become a concern. I put out a statement last week with regards to the conservation in St. Peter's Bay specifically in Cape Breton, where there's an increased fishing effort that is a concern. So, the conservation and protection officers are there to do a job. I do not direct them, but they are absolutely working to make sure that the laws are upheld.
So, given that, oh, did somebody ask me something? Okay. So, given that, are there means that you're using to quantify these catches or to give us an idea of what's happening so that we can get an idea of what's going on in the region?
The CNP officers, of course, have seized some traps. We would have at the department level some of the information on those. I'm actually going to turn to Doug Wenzel, who is the regional director there, and maybe he can talk to just a little bit about the science and what we're seeing from those those actions. Doug, are you there?
I am indeed, Minister. So a couple of points maybe that I can share with the committee, Mr. Chair. As the Minister mentioned earlier, lobster stocks across the Maritimes region are in the healthy zone. And we determine that through a range of science, ranging from catch data from industry, in addition to fishery independent data that we collect. In terms of fishing in St. Peter's Bay, again, as the Minister referenced earlier, we are aware that there are a number of traps that are present in the bay, and we are working very, very closely with our First Nations partners to collaboratively work towards managing any risk to conservation in that particular geography, and we'll continue to do that.
Thank you for that. Thank you, Madam Gill. We'll now go to Mr. Johns for 2.5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Minister. What we've heard, we keep hearing from the Conservatives that the threat of moderate fishery, a treaty protected fishery, is having on the stocks. But the Sabaganagati announced their treaty fisheries catch volume for LFA 34, and they cited that it's 0.005% of the overall commercial catch. Can you confirm that it's not going to have an impact, what they're doing right now, on the health of those stocks?
I will say that, we are always going to be concerned about conservation first. What is happening in St. Mary's Bay is very different than what has happened in St. Peter's Bay. St. Peter's Bay is a much smaller area with a lot more traps than what we were seeing in St. Mary's Bay. This is all things that CNP are working to make sure that they monitor. The fluctuations in landings in St. Mary's Bay are consistent with those across all of the LFAs. So we do not see a conservation challenge. Right now, the stocks are healthy.
Minister, do you see that there's a systemic racism problem in the Department of Fisheries and Oceans?
I mean, I believe, Mr. Johns, as the Prime Minister himself has stated that, there's systemic racism throughout every department in Canada. We know that there are challenges. We take them very seriously, and we're working extremely hard to make sure that we address any concerns that are raised. I think one of the big things, and I'm going to just give a shout out here to MP Batiste, because he talks a lot about education and how important it is for us to all understand that we're all treaty people, and that we all have a role to play in making sure that we're addressing things like racism. I've been very impressed with DFO as well as the Independent Fish Harvesters Association, who are now offering courses on treaty rights and on working with First Nations as part of their regular programming, so that people can understand better what it means to have a treaty right. So that people can understand. Yeah,
we've had many groups testify here that aren't doing anything, fisheries organizations that don't have any plans to address systemic racism. What's your department going to do to help engage those organizations around education? I couldn't agree more, Minister. And who in your cabinet is going to help lead this? Because clearly there's an issue. And also, what are you doing in your department to tackle the systemic racism that's ingrained in the Department of Fisheries and Oceans?
Well, I will say that, we have taken steps. As I've just said, we're working right now with one of the fishing associations, the Independent Fish Harvesters Association, to offer some training or some courses to harvesters, to people who are interested on what it means to have a treaty right, on what those are extremely important conversations. This is a first step, and as you well know, every journey starts with the first step. I think that this is something that can absolutely be expanded out to other organizations that are interested. We will work to make sure that that those things are available to other fishing organizations that would want to take advantage of them, and I hope that they would.
Thank you, Mr. Johns. We'll now go to Mr. Bragdon for 5 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Minister, I just want to go back again to your colleague, Mr. MP Wayne Easter's comments, who chaired the Fisheries Committee looking into and at the moderate livelihood fisheries. He recently stated publicly and said that the lobster fishery must remain in season. And he really emphasized as being important. Do you share Mr. Easter's opinion that all fishing should be kept in season? And if so, what direction have you given to the DFO officers on how to enforce seasons for all fishers?
So first of all, Mr. Bragdon, I do not give direction to CNP officers. They have a job to do. They do that job. I do not direct CNP. That would be like the Minister of Public Safety directing the RCMP. It just doesn't happen. They are, officials of the law, and they will uphold the law. With regards to, the question around seasons, which is an important one. I will say that there are many paths to making sure that we reach a lasting solution here, and that those paths are being discussed at the negotiation table. This is not something that I'm going to comment on to prejudge how negotiations go, but I will say that this is I can't stress enough, and I've said it before, I'll say it again. I have heard very loud and clear from commercial harvesters what their concerns are. Those are things that I take very seriously as I'm going forward with any of the negotiations that we're doing.
Well, thank you, Minister. And I'm glad to hear you're taking it very seriously. But it would seem by the input that we've been receiving, they feel like that many times whatever input they've had has not been heard or being received or implemented or being factored in. In fact, right now, with what has been circulating and what is out in the public right now, there's many questions arising. Is your government currently actively pursuing the establishment of a separate fishing authority? And is your government open to having two separate and distinct fishing authorities? I think that's a fair question that a lot of Canadians have right now. And I want to come back to that. Are you open to establishing a separate fishing authority?
Mr. Bragdon, the Supreme Court made it very clear that First Nations have a right to a moderate livelihood fishery. I am working in negotiations with First Nations to make sure that we implement that right. The negotiation is something that is between the First Nations and this government. I don't know how much more clear I can make that. These are things that are part of negotiations. I have heard very loud and clear from the commercial harvesters what their concerns are. I have talked to many community members, to stakeholders, about their.
Thank you, Minister. And no one is disputing the Indigenous peoples have a right to fish. No one's disputing that. What is happening here is that many stakeholders have felt totally left out of the process and in the dark, and things have escalated to the point of tensions where we are right now because of the absence of leadership and direct involvement by those who should be at the table and part of the process of reconciliation and coming to a solution that all parties can be part of. I feel right now, Minister, there's an absence that's there, and now we're outsourcing to third parties and other interested people to do the job that should have been done right from the beginning by you, the Minister, and the leadership of this country, namely the Prime Minister. They've not been involved. Why is that?
And I would disagree with you, Mr. Bragdon. They have been involved. I have been meeting with the commercial harvesters since as far back as before I was the minister. I have heard from commercial harvesters about their concerns. I take everything I hear from them into consideration with everything that I do. I can provide you with a list of who I have met with. I think I already have. Mr. Bragdon, I would like to finish because you did ask me a question, so I would like the ability to finish answering that question. The important thing here is to make sure that they are listened to. One of the things they asked for was someone that they could talk to. So we wanted to make sure that's why we have Mr. Surratt in place.
Thank you, Minister. Thank you, Minister. And I appreciate that. But did you consult with the First Nations and the commercial fishers before making the decision of who you appointed to be the third party negotiator?
This is actually an independent appointment. We wanted to make sure it was somebody. We wanted to make sure it was somebody that could speak to both sides, and that is one of the things that we took into consideration. Mr. Surratt has got a stellar reputation in dealing with this type of issue. He is well respected in his community. He is well respected in the fishing industry for working through fisheries issues in the past, and I have full confidence in his ability.
Thank you, Mr. Bragdon. We'll now go to Mr. Batiste for 5 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Minister. Since 1999, Unama'ki Institute of Natural Resources, UINR, has been working together and collaboratively with Departments of Fisheries, Oceans, with different protections agencies on a wide source of different species, such as eels, such as oysters, such as salmon. We had Shelley Denny, who's doing her PhD on marine biology, testify at this committee that they've been working collaboratively with government on a number of different species. I'm wondering, are they not a promising example of how government can collaboratively work with Indigenous nations on resource management? And they've been doing it for more than 20 years. Is this not a model that has been working in Cape Breton, Unama'ki? And is this something that we could, expand to all of the fishery?
Absolutely. This is, Shelley Denny is somebody who has been working quite closely, I believe, on a number of different issues with regards to fisheries management. There are a number of Mi'kmaq scientists or science-led studies that we've seen. It's important that as we move forward with the First Nations' ability to implement their right, that we have the right science. It's great if we could build capacity within the communities themselves to be able to provide that science to the Department of Fisheries and Oceans, to be able to have their own Guardians program, for example. I think these are all ways that we can make sure that we're, like I said, building capacity within the communities to help manage this fishery.
Thank you, Minister. We've heard from chiefs in this committee talk about, that the communities really have no appetite for selling of rights. In fact, one of the chiefs said that the last committee that if a Mi'kmaq chief was to suggest selling that right, that they wouldn't be chief for very long. With that in mind, is there flexibility within our negotiations or flexibility out there to look at a model that doesn't doesn't include modifying existing rights or what they would call selling existing rights?
Yeah, I think that, I don't think anybody wants First Nations to sell their rights. I think that is absolutely not the approach that we would want to take as a government. This is as I've said many times, this is a right that has been affirmed by the Supreme Court, and we want to make sure is implemented. I guess with regards to flexibility in terms of negotiations, as I've said many times already tonight, I can't speak to what's actually happening at the negotiating table, but I think having flexibility around mandates, about having flexibility around how we do this from community to community is going to be extremely important as we go forward to make sure that we are implementing those rights.
Okay, thank you, Minister. And I find it odd, I've heard the Conservatives member opposite talk to you about have they read the Marshall decisions. And as a former professor of Mi'kmaq studies, I'm wondering sometimes what Marshall case they're alluding to, because both Marshall I and Marshall II said that Donald Marshall Jr., someone who grew up 30 minutes away from me, someone who I knew in my life, who I thanked for his efforts, not once but twice, he went in front of the Supreme Court, fished for eels, sold those eels out of season both times, and both times the Supreme Court ruled that his treaties, protected by Section 35 of the Constitution, also protected by Section 52 of the Constitution, that says that the Constitution of Canada is the supreme law of Canada, and any law that is inconsistent with that provision of the Constitution is, to the extent of the inconsistency, of no force and effect. And I'm wondering how much that weighs into Canada's judgment when we're dealing with Mi'kmaq rights that are upheld twice in the Supreme Court of Canada, that are recognized by the Constitution, the supreme law of this Canada. How much weight do we give into that when we're actually considering putting any kind of regulations in place that would be of no force and effect legally?
I would say that, that is actually a very good, very valid point. The Prime Minister himself has said that there's no more important relationship for us as a government than with First Nations people. We have seen over centuries, building systems that do not include First Nations, and that has to change. This is part of that change, and change is difficult. Change is, there are going to be challenges along the way as we move forward with this, but we as a government are committed to making sure that we do uphold those rights, to making sure that, that we don't have another situation where we've got another Marshall case, making sure that we are upholding the laws of the land, and that's one of the things that will be, guide us as we move forward.
Thank you, Mr. Batiste. We'll now go to Mr. D'Entremont for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I want to start off a little bit here. Listening to Mr. Johns a couple of times, which it seems like he's continually mixing up what District 34 is versus what St. Mary's Bay is, and I wish that he would reach out to people in my riding and understand the situation that they find themselves in. And he continues to try to draw the issue of an illegal commercial summer fishery that has been going on in St. Mary's Bay for close to 25 years, according to the previous Minister of Fisheries, who can look out his front window and watch what's going on there. This has been the challenge for the people of Clare for a number of years. They're very concerned about it, and they're very concerned about what's happening in their bay that they look at every day. So, Mr. Johns, I do hope at some point that you do reach out to folks like that. And I offered you my phone number on a number of occasions so that you can understand the situation here in Southwest Nova Scotia. Listen, I want to talk a little bit about Bear River and Acadia, because Bear River and Acadia have written 2 letters at this point. Bear River is sort of to the Annapolis side of thing. Acadia is the band to the southwest corner of it, and talked about the territorial area of their bans, and how St. Mary's Bay sort of fits in their traditional area. I just wondering, has the minister considered the letters from Chief Potter and Chief Robinson?
Thank you, Mr. D'Entremont. You've always been Chris. You've always been Chris. I actually have met with Chief Potter directly, and I recognize the challenges that she has brought forward. I will continue to have conversations with her as well as with Chief Deborah. I know that Chief Deborah is in the middle of an election right now, so but it's extremely important to me to hear from all of the First Nations that are impacted. As I have said from the beginning, this is a very complex issue. That's one of the challenges, is that you do have, First Nations within other areas that are impacted. We want to make sure that we're doing everything that we can to support them as well.
All right, let's go back to where I sort of left off the last time when we talk about Chief Sack and what's happening on Facebook. Not that we should listen to what happens on Facebook, but this is where it's coming from. Where he yesterday and today he's been trying to recruit people to disrupt the opening of District 34. I can send copies around to folks if they haven't seen it. So I'm just wondering what the minister is doing within her branch, and maybe what she's doing with maybe public safety on making sure that everyone is safe in this particular instance.
Absolutely. That has to be the number one priority. You and I have had this conversation a number of times about safety. I would like to actually ask Doug Wenzel if he would be willing to kind of comment on this one, because I know that he is well apprised of the situation. Doug?
Thank you, Minister. So yeah, Mr. Chair, just to pick up on Mr. D'Entremont's question, I think, given the current environment, we continue to be concerned, as the Minister has said on many occasions, for the safety of all harvesters. So we take any and all threats to orderly fisheries very, very seriously. We work very, very closely with our RCMP colleagues and other enforcement partners on the ground to share intelligence and making sure that everybody informs the risk assessment appropriately. And we're also working in terms of the mandate of Fisheries and Oceans Canada. We're working very, very closely with individual harbour authorities to ensure that they are assessing the safety and security of harvesters at local ports. And we are working, of course, with all commercial harvesters, both First Nations and non-First Nations, to help ensure that they can prosecute the fisheries appropriately. So we're going to continue to do that. And again, it's going to be through open dialogue that we move this forward, not through violent or disruptive acts. Thank you.
Okay. And I wrote a quick email, or my office wrote a quick email to Deputy Minister Sargent when it came to the usage of the Soniaville Wharf. We know there's still an injunction there. Of course, Indigenous folks are doing their fishery from there, but there's like 15 or so boats and fishers that normally use Soniaville Wharf for their home port. So I'm just wondering, has there been some work on that one?
Thank you, Mr. D'Entremont, as we're gone over time. We'll now go to Mr. Morrissey for 5 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Chair. Minister, I was pleased to hear you make several comments in response to earlier questions, and I'm paraphrasing a bit. You stated you'd never do anything to harm the overall fishery. You assured that harvesters are not left out. You heard their concerns. You don't want them to be left out in the process. Some are trying to paint your ministry as not hearing the concerns from the commercial industry, that the government's only focused in one direction. Minister, could you comment on your role as the minister in ensuring, and what steps you are taking to ensure that the interest of this very valuable commercial fishery is protected in Maritime Canada in particular, and Atlantic Canada, as I believe you may have alluded to earlier. But I want you to be have the opportunity to be clear on the record, so there's no misunderstanding of that on your position that you have to adjudicate and protect both sides in this discussion.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Morrissey, and that is absolutely the case. I have been meeting with commercial harvesters since I was first elected. But since I've become the minister, I've met with a number of the commercial harvesters, even before the rise of tensions that we saw in St. Mary's Bay. I will continue to meet with them. They have an extremely important voice in all of this to make sure that their concerns are being heard. One of the reasons that we appointed Mr. Surratt as this federal special representative is because we wanted to make sure that commercial harvesters had a voice. They obviously cannot be at the negotiating table because they are it's a nation-to-nation negotiation, but what they have to say is extremely important. It's important to me, it's important to the department, it's important to the government. We want to make sure that we recognize their concerns. And as I've said, I come from a small commercial fishing area. We're not going to do anything that's going to impact the stocks. We need to make sure that the industry is sustainable for the long term. That is the number one priority that I have, and it will continue to be.
Thank you, Minister. And just further to clarify, so that we all understand the fact that we understand that the negotiations that you're responsible for currently in reaching agreements with First Nations community on moderate livelihood is between you as representatives of the Government of Canada and First Nations community, and those negotiations must stay whole in that concept. But at the same time, you do not give up your jurisdiction or responsibility for ensuring that the interests of the commercial fishery are taken into consideration when decisions are making. Am I correct on that?
That's correct. I mean, I think it would be safe to say that I have to take fisheries management decisions into account whenever with any decision, and that would include, any negotiations we have. All of the fisheries management decisions, of course, go through DFO, come through me. Whether it's with regards to seasons, whether it's with regards to, catches, whether it's whatever it is, all of them come through DFO. That will continue. We need to make sure that we are protecting this very valuable resource, and something that's extremely vital to the growth in Atlantic Canada.
So the voice of the commercial industry, commercial fisheries in Atlantic Canada is resonating within your ministry and you personally.
I have met with commercial harvesters on a regular basis. My officials have met with them, almost daily, it seems like in a lot of cases. I said I could provide a list of the ones that I have met with. I know that there's more to do. We have been focused pretty much on Nova Scotia right now, but I know that I'm more than happy to talk to representatives from other areas as well. I have met with PEI, with Cape Breton, with people from the Independent Fisheries Associations, which represents members in all the provinces in Atlantic Canada and Quebec. So those are conversations that I consider extremely valuable, and I'll continue to have.
Well, thank you, Minister, because it's extremely important that the commercial fishers who are following this process as well hear that coming from you. So I appreciate those comments. Chair, am I out?
You're on the button there now.
Okay.
So you're done. We'll now go to Madam Gill for 2.5 minutes or less, please.
Merci, Monsieur.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to come back to the question of the Fisheries Management Minister. I was wondering the following. Do you believe that the coexistence of several regulatory frameworks in the same territory for the same species is the solution? Do you believe that this is possible, that it serves the proper management of the resource?
that we need to find a path forward to implement a First Nations right that respects conservation, that respects fishing effort, that makes sure that we address the concerns we're hearing from commercial harvesters. That is what I believe. That underpins everything I do to make sure that we're moving forward to implement the First Nations right to a moderate livelihood, but at the same time making sure that the resource is sustainable for the future, making sure that we do every decision that we make deals with the conservation objectives that we've set for the industry. Right now, lobster specifically is what we're talking about. That is a very healthy stock. We want to make sure it stays that way.
At the same time, earlier, you were saying when people are ready to talk with regard to the moderate livelihood fishery, people are listening with regard to management. Both the Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal fishers must agree on regulations and they must apply it, but it's difficult in the context of the present tensions. We've lost the sound of Ms. Gill. The interpreter is no longer getting the sound from Ms. Gill. We seem to have lost the connection. I don't know if Ms. Gill is muted. This is the interpreter speaking.
Yeah. Can you hear us, Madam Gill?
No.
Yeah, do you?
Can you hear me now? Yes. I don't know what happened, says Ms. Gill. In fact, what I was wondering is this, the department, your government, have you assessed the possibility of some co-management? So have everyone sit down at the same table. Every party could speak about its desires, its plans, the department as well for management and conservation purposes. Is this something that you've envisaged? You've talked about the future. I believe that based on what people have told us, that could be a solution for the future, to sit everyone down around the same table for management purposes.
To ongoing negotiations. The negotiations with First Nations have to be on a nation to, can you hear me? Okay. Have to be on a nation-to-nation basis. That is between the Government of Canada and the First Nations communities. With regards to making sure that commercial harvesters are heard, we are absolutely engaging with the commercial industry. We are also have the special representative who is working with them to bridge gaps to make sure that he can foster dialogue and make sure he is also hearing from the commercial sector about what needs to be what has to happen from their perspective. These are all things that are extremely important and will lead into making sure that we have the right path forward to making sure that we implement the right but still protect the fishery for the long term.
Thank you, Madam Gill. We'll now go to Mr. Johns for 2.5 minutes, please, to close it out.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And before I ask a question, just for the record, I find it disappointing and actually appalling that the Conservatives are spending time attacking me and this committee and trying to shame Chief Sack. And here it is, an MP. They haven't even picked up the phone. They haven't even called Chief Sack or the Sabega-Nagadi people during this whole crisis. Not one Conservative has called them, according to The Nation. Instead, it takes an NDP MP 5,000 kilometers away to stand up for their safety, the courts of Canada and their inherent treaty rights. So when you talk about relevance, that is relevant. Minister, we've heard time and time again at this committee that in order to have a just process, Indigenous people often have to break an unjust law. As a result, there's an over-criminalization of Indigenous people in the eyes of the public and the government. In reality, it's the government who is refusing to hold up the law, to hold up Section 35 of the Constitution, and are not responding when First Nations are the victims of domestic terror attacks like we saw. Why is it that your government and the Conservative governments that came before are not able to follow the law when it comes to Indigenous fishing rights?
Mr. Johns, I would say that, I can't speak to the RCMP's investigations. I know that there have been charges laid after what happened in St. Mary's Bay. I know that they are on the ground there now to try and keep tensions down. They will continue to do the work that they need to do. We need to make sure that that people are safe. I think that has to be the number one priority for all of us as we go forward. And, you know, I mean, as you and I have had this conversation before, First Nations treaty rights are inherent rights that we need to make sure are implemented. I am working diligently to make sure that we find that path forward. You know, it's been a very difficult few months. There's no questions in terms of how you know, we've seen things happening in St. Mary's Bay with regards to vandalism, with regards to the frustrations we see from commercial fishers and from First Nations fishers. We want to make sure we're doing everything we can to keep everyone safe and still move forward to make sure that we implement the treaty rights.
Minister, multiple witnesses at this committee have said that they don't believe DFO is capable of negotiating in good faith with Indigenous fishers on a nation-to-nation basis. Why is there a perception that DFO can't negotiate? Is there a problem with your mandate, with the resources DFO has, or legislative changes that need to be made?
You know, I mean, we're working with a number of different things. We are also, you know, making sure that we include CERNAC in the negotiations. They are at the table with us, with Minister Bennett. You know, these are all this is a long-standing issue, Mr. Johns, as you well know. This is not something that happened in the last 2 months. This has happened over successive governments over many years. We need to do everything we possibly can to move forward to make sure that we're working with First Nations communities, that we are listening to the commercial industry, and that we are going to move forward to make sure that we implement a treaty right that was affirmed by the Supreme Court of Canada 21 years ago.
How much time do I have, Mr. Chair?
Oh, your time is up, Gord. Sorry about that. But 2.5 minutes don't be long going when once you start the clock. We'll close off here. I want to say a special thank you to the Minister and our staff this evening for accommodating us for the full 2 hours, even though we were late starting. We really do appreciate your time here at committee. I want to say a big thank you to all committee members this evening for their congenial way they acted for the most part and treated the minister with the utmost respect. I do appreciate that as chair, and treated all other members with respect. I will close off with that. A big thank you to staff, to the clerk, to the analysts, and of course the wonderful interpreters that we use every evening that we have our committee meeting. And wish everybody on the committee a good evening. Enjoy what's left of your evening. Here in Newfoundland, it's later than anywhere else, so there's not much of the evening left. It's a nightfall, and I'm not going to be up much longer. But again, thanks for everything today. Look forward to seeing everybody again real soon. Committee now stands adjourned.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Night.
Good night.